Joy Givers, you are at the right place because it is the Fall Infusion series of joy. My name is Deb McGregor, and with us today is Emily Reno of Mezclada. Welcome to today's show, Emily.
Thanks, Deb.
Well, I am so thrilled about you coming because we're going to be talking about food. We're going to be talking about sustainability, emerging farmers, like all the things. How are we ever going to get this in our time? Like, what are we thinking here? This is like how our personalities are, right? God, it's so much in there. So, Emily, one of the things, like, I was actually thinking about this when I was walking the dog this morning, and I was like, I sort of entrepreneur crush on you a lot. You are like this woman who's doing all the things all the time, and you're in a profession that I've always been fascinated with. But it's not been my profession, but it's like sort of like, oh, if I were in a different whatever, like I'd be in the hippie band going around doing food things, right? So let's introduce people to you. Talk to us about like a little bit about you, how you actually got interested in food systems and sustainable farming in the first place, because this is fascinating. I think it's very, very fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I really appreciate your kind words. And yeah, it's funny that you should mention that. Yeah, the hippie food thing, that probably started where I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas. It's one of the things that they always said growing up was that it's a blue dot in a sea of red. So a pretty liberal place in comparison to the rest of the state. And I think that just being surrounded by so many environmentalists growing up, it just sort of became part of my identity. And I think that like really early on in school, we just received a lot of messages about environmental destruction and climate change, and that all of these things are just going to hit the fan. And my generation was going to be the group of people that had to take care of these things and figure out what are we going to do. And so I think that seed had been planted at a really young age. And then as I got older and as I got into junior high, I was really into recycling. I was always looking at like different magazines about like making your own natural products and homemade makeup and stuff like that. And I would collage these things into little booklets because I was just obsessed with figuring out like, what can I do, to like play my part. And then it wasn't until I got sort of further into community college and starting to take classes around sort of environmental science and environmental studies that I realized very quickly how overwhelming everything was, and that, a single person can't really do a whole lot, and that I would have to sort of narrow my focus of like, okay, if I want to have impact, I'm probably going to need to focus on something small and then sort of have things grow from there. And, I just so happened to kind of come across the Sustainable Ag Certificate program at my community college. And that was really like the big turning point and eye-opening moment for me to get into sustainable agriculture. I mean, I had grown up with a mom who did some awesome, community, like gardening at our home. And I always loved just like rubbing my hands in our like thyme or lemon thyme and then rubbing it all over my body just so that I could smell like it, and like picking grapes and getting in trouble for eating all of the cherry tomatoes. We would always travel, like whenever we traveled for the races, my dad, he, traveled a lot around the Midwest in a Mini Cooper as part of the Sports Car Club of America. And so I had this really interesting childhood of like going to all of these different cities in the Midwest. And then at the same time, we would always seek out like, what are the best restaurants that we can go to in this area or this neighborhood, this new city that we've never been to. We'd wait up to like 3-4 hours outside of, this really nice Italian restaurant, like Italian barrio of St. Louis, right? And it was just like this tradition that we would go out of our way for good food. And so I think when it got to the point of working on, this campus farm and learning more about sort of the local food scene in Kansas City, it came very naturally that I already placed a lot of value on good food, but being able to see now all of the work that goes into making what I love so dearly, and just sort of the personal satisfaction that came from getting my hands in the dirt and really moving my body in a way that was so functional, right? Like I wasn't going to the gym and running on a treadmill. I was planting something, harvesting it, being able to prepare it in my kitchen. And I think that, all of those experiences really fostered within me a love of like, how can I build a career for myself within this field?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so at some point you've got all these ideas, which could be super overwhelming, right? It's like because all of it's like, well, do I do this? Do I do this? How did you actually start sorting through that to determine, okay, this is the impact I really want to make, and this is the area I want to focus on as I move forward?
Process of elimination. Honestly, I remember when I was in high school, I had this really long list of all of these careers that I thought I wanted, and in different degrees that I could study in order to get myself there. And I explored a lot of things as a volunteer. A lot of that was honestly driven by I don't have any money to pay for college, so I'm going to have to figure out a creative way to get all of these scholarships so that I can. And service was always the thing that people were like, you have to have a track record of having worked in your community. And so I basically tried to figure out like, how do I marry my interests with actual needs in the community? And I did a lot of volunteering. I remember I thought for a long time that I was going to become like a lobbyist for carbon tax legislation. I started volunteering a lot for Citizens Climate Lobby, made my way to DC for my first conference. And we got into one of those meeting rooms, and I'm responsible to be like the note taker, and everybody else is sort of, they've got their roles and their lines that they have to say, and we only have 5 minutes. And I just realized in that moment how disappointed I was in all of the hours of preparation about what language you can and can't use when you're talking with this legislator and what things they care about. And I'm just like, dude, like, I just want to see the results of what I'm working on, right? So lobbying was out. I moved on to my next interest, which was Spanish language studies. I started volunteering, teaching Spanish classes at a local church, and I absolutely loved it. And so I continued to build on that. And then, I went through this process throughout college of just doing the same thing, trying stuff over and over again, figuring out what I like, stop doing the things that I didn't like, and then, add things that I did. And I think that maybe could be one of the reasons why, like, you see me as somebody who's doing so much, is because I'm constantly in this like rotation of what are the things that I love, what are the things that are probably on their way out, how can I find a way of marrying these things together. And I think that, like, I'm really grateful for all of my mom's support growing up, because she always said, like, it doesn't matter what you do or what you study. Like, I just want you to be happy, and I just want you to go to college. And I realize in retrospect how rare that is, to have that kind of really like open-ended support from a loved one. And I think that like a lot of what happens with people is, they hear these messages and these narratives at a young age, and then it's sort of ingrained in their mind that there is no other option other than what they've been presented.
Yes.
So I think that has really helped me of just kind of like juggling all of these things. And I think that it was really just kind of like my interest in farming, sort of Spanish language, international travel, and like creativity. And then sort of stumbling upon this world of personal growth and development, where these goals that I had set for myself a long time ago, suddenly all of these things started coming through, and I started having like these crazy adventures in my life. And I realized like there's opportunity with the sort of the ways that I was able to follow through on goals that I had set for myself. And all of the things that I was sort of seeing in the economic and community development space, beginning farmer training, of why is it that we have such a hard time allowing people that want to get into farming access to the land and capital that they need. And I was like, I think there's something missing here in all of these systems and structures. And what I'm having success over here, I think could be applicable. And so that's really where Mezclada was born, was seeing these gaps and trying to figure out how can I bring them together, and how can I bring all of the things that I love under one roof at the same time.
I love this. And as you're talking about like rotating through the ideas, rotating through these things, it's like, yeah, it's like rotating crops, right? Or like rotate, I mean, the soil. I mean, it actually metaphorically even really ties into what you're talking about. I mean, both metaphoric and an analogy concept, right? Like you actually have different pieces of both that are coming into this. And one of the things I love so much about you is like, you're like, well, I'm seeing this over here and I'm seeing this over here, and I'm going to pull these together in this space. And I believe that's one of your skill sets, is your ability to see those multiple things happening, but then go, okay, here's how we pull it in and move it forward. And I also love how you take all these experiences and you say, how can I use this information or this experience to actually help empower someone else with what I've learned and keep moving it forward? Like, you are a move it forward person, right? It's not, I need to be up here and all the way. It's like, how do we keep empowering and moving this forward to continue? It's not even just helping one person or a group of people. It truly is the full of humanity. Like, everything you're doing is the full of everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the word empowerment definitely resonates. I think that's part of the mission statement, right?
Yep.
We're working to like inspire and empower the next generation of land stewards. And I think that comes from a lot of my own experiences, right? Is that when you can see examples of other people who have had success in what you're trying to do, when you can equip people with the tools in order to have real results in their own life, and you can sort of test those things out and then see this is working, right? Like, that's a really empowering experience.
Yes.
And I just want to be able to share that with people.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned being a land steward. Talk to me a little bit about what that means, because I think we sometimes put this steward word out there, or stewardship out there, sometimes at different capacities. So what does being a land steward look like, and how do we become a good land steward?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think that I was very intentional about not using the word future farmer, because I think that when we talk about sort of farming in general, it just elicits this certain image in people's head, and the interpretation can have such a big variety what that looks like. And I think that when I really got down to the root of where I was seeing, like, what impact do I want to have, all of these statistics about demographic shifts and what does that mean within the world of farming, a lot of it had to do with what are the implications of the people who are owning land? How are they treating the land? And how does investing in future owners of farmland change the way that land is managed? And I use the word steward because it sort of has this connotation of responsibility and a positive, connotation of responsibility.
Mhm.
And I think that so much of what I'm trying to show people is that in having this connection with the land, and a very intentional one in which you are responsible for, like, the soil health, the microbes within the soil, that they are flourishing, that it's not just this relationship where I own this thing, I'm going to rip it all up and I'm going to throw these seeds in the ground, and then I'm going to harvest the thing and sell it to the market and make a bunch of money, right? You're really thinking about, how am I creating an ecosystem at this scale, whatever that looks like, that can provide for me, that's contributing to these natural cycles within nature. And there's just so much research out there that talks about, when people have a physical connection with the earth, how it, like, even produces oxytocin within their bodies in ways that other kinds of activities just don't. And it just speaks to the importance of us being connected to the land.
Oh my gosh, when you said that, I just had this vision of, I feel like it's sort of like in northern Minnesota when the winter comes and you actually see people go through like this kind of downward thing. And then you see people say, oh, I went into the wherever and I was able to dig in the dirt a little bit and my mood completely went up. Look at us even in the spring when all of a sudden it's like the greenhouses are like, everybody can't wait to get their hands in the dirt. That oxytocin, it's so true. I believe it.
Yeah.
We need to have a business where they just have a bunch of dirt that you just like play in the dirt in the winter, right? Like, this could be a thing.
Yes. No, I think there is probably somebody who should, or maybe already has an idea for, like, therapy, right?
Yeah.
Come
Dirt
to our
therapy.
high tunnel.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why not, right?
Yes.
So as we talk about then moving into this being a good land steward, it's all of us. Like, it's not just the people growing the food, right? And this is something that I feel really strongly about, is that we all have a responsibility as it relates to our earth, as it relates to our land. We have been gifted this. And I feel like so many times some of our behavior does not match what the level of that gift is. And so I'm glad that you're bringing this up, because I do believe that it's something we are all like, we all have a piece in, right? We all have a role in this.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think some people, it's just sort of your exposure, like what you have seen, what you've been taught growing up, how connected you've been to those systems of agriculture. I think I listened to something the other day where this is a friend actually talking to me about another friend of his who teaches students about just sort of gardening and trying to get them connected to nature. And he would always ask this question of, like, where does your food come from? And then they would answer the grocery store, and he'd say, wrong, and he'd sort of back up and be like, this is actually where your food comes from. And so I think that I feel like the word that comes to mind for me is consciousness, right? Like everybody's operating at these different levels. And I mean, ultimately, my goal is to take a certain, slice of the pie of humanity that maybe has already been thinking about, maybe we should do this a little bit differently,
Yeah.
and help move them in a direction that's like, yes, actually, you're right. You're on the right path here. And here's all of the resources that can help you get to, the thing that you're trying to create.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much sense. So I know that one of the pieces that you really are working on is the this emerging farmer, emerging stewards. Talk to me a little bit about what that work looks like. How do people find you? How do we connect people to you?
Mm-hmm. So I think defining emerging is probably worth doing, just because that's also like a kind of jargony thing. And I don't even know outside of Minnesota if that's become popular or not. I have found that Minnesota in general seems to be pretty advanced in terms of some of their food policy and their initiatives, in terms of just national initiatives, just really cool, and probably one of the best things about being here. And so the way that at least the Minnesota Department of Agriculture defines it is as sort of farmers who are coming from historically marginalized community, historically underrepresented. So for them, that's looking at people of color, veterans, people with disabilities, women, anyone who hasn't necessarily represented the majority in terms of the farmers that are out there today. And I think that's really like the target market and sort of my audience, the community that I would like to serve. The reason is that I believe they all share sort of these elements of discrimination, and there's actually something I think very unifying about being part of the minority. It's sort of a special place in my heart, because as sort of a Mexican American, being a first generation college student, didn't grow up in a wealthy socioeconomic class, right? Like I applied for and paid for most of my college years through scholarships that were dedicated to minority students. And I think so much of that trajectory and that financial support that I received from other people really fostered within me this desire to give back, right, to my own community. And in this case, it's actually people like me who are trying to get into farming that didn't come from a farming background, that have less than 10 years experience, probably grew up in an urban area and don't have these connections or ties to rural places, but they have a huge love for growing food, trying to serve their community, celebrating their cultural roots through their food, and really telling this powerful story about, how is it that purchasing my product is actually helping my family create wealth where it's been robbed for generations. And so that's kind of where that's going. And in terms of, like how people can find out about more of what I'm doing, I do have a website. It's mezclada.co. And I've got courses that I am launching. I actually have probably my second course is going to be next spring. So it's a 6-week online course that is designed to be sort of a live experience for people going through different things like, your personal identity and spirituality. So linking sort of your human design chart to your natural strengths and thinking about how does that show up in designing your business model. We look at mindset and sort of healing your relationship to money. So thinking about how is it that your belief systems, experiences that you had in childhood are actually affecting the way that you see money flow into your life. And for people that are needing to call in $500,000 to be able to purchase some farmland, right? Like these are people that might really need some help with that.
Yeah.
And then we kind of look at, building accountability systems, creating a roadmap for people so that they've got a plan, post program of how are they going to go about getting the resources that they need to start their farm. And ultimately, the goal here is to be creating community among like-minded farmers. I would love people to graduate from this experience and feel like they've got a whole team of cheerleaders behind them who say like, yes, you are capable of doing hard things and I'm going to be here, when you need assistance. Like that's really, I think, something that has been valuable in my own experiences of gone through different courses. And it's always just the social capital, right? Relationships oftentimes are the currency that people need in order to get to that next step, to open the door. And that I think is super valuable and what I'm hoping to create for people.
Yeah, I absolutely love this. Now, as an entrepreneur, I know that life is not always going smooth, right? Like the road has a lot. I call it the EKG machine of life a lot of times. Talk to me about your experience being an entrepreneur. Like we kind of want to know the good, the bad, and the ugly about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I feel like this is the first time where I would label myself as such, but I mean, when I was even in community college as a side hustle, right? Outside of what I was doing as, serving at a retirement home and taking classes, I was offering tutoring classes to, the wife of a friend who needed to improve her like written and sort of conversational English. And she's originally from Colombia. So all my Spanish studies really came into play in being able to help out with that. And, I'd find other ways to just like do these random gigs for people and just helping out. And I think that helped a lot because at an early age, I had to figure out how to file, my taxes in a way that accounted for the income from these things that I was doing. But because I always had so many other sort of resources and support, and I was still living at home, right, while going to college, I didn't really feel like there was a lot of risk associated with it because I wasn't relying on that source of income to be able to live and pay my bills. And now it's a very different situation, right? Like I left my full-time job at the end of July and I'm doing consulting work, formed a consultancy with 2 other women. And that was really my strategic move of this is me listening to tons of podcasts about how to do this well, right? Transition versus not. And everybody says like, take it slow. Don't put so much pressure on yourself to get it right from day one and create a financial cushion for yourself. And, I had spent the previous year and a half unknowingly building up my FU fund, which was great. So I had some money in savings, which provided for the buffer that I really needed in those first couple of months of consulting. And then, just like being able to rely on a team of people versus having to do this all by myself has been a blessing in disguise. And I had no idea how much I would benefit from that until now, right? When there's just like lots of projects and moving parts going on. And I work remotely for the most part, so doing a lot of my stuff from home. I do have some co-working space about 25 minutes from where I live, but I'm not in there every day, and the people in that office aren't there either. So there's a lot of ways that you have to find just sort of like habits, practices, other people that can help hold you accountable to following through on what you say you're going to do. Not every day is going to be a productive day. Not everything that you outline in your calendar to take X number of hours is going to take X number of hours. And I think that I've really had to teach myself how to have grace and patience and a lot of self-love, right? Self-compassion of Yeah, it's not going to go perfectly. And I'm going to fail a lot at this. And there's probably going to be a lot of days that I just cry because I need to. And, it's just part of the process. But I think that, like, what I see is sort of the reward on the other side of this, which ultimately, like, I have been motivated a lot in my life by financial freedom. And a lot of that came from just not having a lot of options growing up, right? Like, we were pretty strapped for money. We were very frugal and also like very industrious and creative about how we used what we had. And I think that that has served me in so many other ways in my life. But I think it's also fostered within me this desire to not have to worry about money, right? To be able to go into the co-op and spend unapologetically on a high quality cheese, right? Or the other organic produce that I would love to have fill my fridge versus, okay, can I afford this one or can I afford this one? And just constantly having to think about the numbers. So that's been a huge motivator for me. And I believe that entrepreneurship is a really great route because I get to set the standards for, what are my financial goals and how do I get there? And now I have a team of people who are checking in with me weekly to say, are you meeting your financial goals? How can we help you to do that? That's really incredible. And I'm just really excited to see where all of this goes.
Well, and what I love about you is even though there's the money piece, you've always focused on the impact piece. Here's the impact I want to create. This is what I'd like to design in the world. This is where I want to see people thriving. And that's where you truly have put your focus. Not that the money piece isn't there, but your approach is sort of like when I focus on those things, when I do those things, the money does follow. And your passion for what you do is so evident in everything, in every step. And I hope people are feeling that in you and throughout this interview is that what you create, what you are doing in this space is so needed. And I really believe that thing, like we look back X number of years or whatever, I believe 50 years from now, we're going to look back at this time period and it's people like you who are pioneering so much of this that we're going to look back and say, oh my gosh, do you remember when? I really do believe that because so many times what we're doing now does not get realized until X number of years later, right? Like this is just our world. This is just what happens, right? It's so hindsight's so 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, we're going to look back and go, oh my gosh, it's a really good thing these programs got started back then. Because if not, what would our sustainable food look like? What would our land stewardship look like? Like this is making an impact. And so everything else is following from that.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I feel like so much of my training and that sort of my studies and urban and regional planning, right? Like that's what I got my master's degree in. And it's all about the long game, right? We are trained to think in terms of 20, 30, 40-year time horizons. And I don't think most people really can wrap their heads around what that looks like or means. But I feel like even when you think about nature's timelines, right? And sort of trees and all of these rings that are telling stories about the different years, that have passed and what happened in that season. Seeds even hold that kind of information, right? Like they have a way of capturing whatever happened to them in that previous growing season. And they're taking that information with them as they're being planted again. And it's just sort of this idea of like, you have to be of that mind of what I am doing will extend beyond the time that I'm even alive. And when you can go into building something with that frame of mind, I just feel like the quality of what you can create is so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen. There's just so much around this. I mean, I feel like we could just keep going on and on. Unfortunately, it's like, oh my gosh, we've already been talking for almost 30 minutes. Can you believe it? It just goes so fast, doesn't it? Emily, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. I'm hoping that people have been enlightened. I hope that people have learned something. I hope that people have been inspired to do something. And even just being like, you talked about consciousness and awareness. It's even when you go into the store, even being conscious of next time you look at that food, you might think of this conversation with Emily and go like, yeah, where is this sort? How is this coming? Where does this come from? And I think just even starting to get people educated and asking those questions is going to shift the way that we show up in the world. And you are a part of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deb. I really appreciate it. And it's just such a great opportunity to be able to share with others and connect with folks that are interested in similar things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, friends, thanks so much for tuning into today's Infusion of Joy. Our guest has been Emily Reno of Mezclada. I did put her website in the comments, so please get in touch with her if you want to have a more conversation with her, find out more about what she's doing, get on her e-newsletter, all of the things, right? Emily, thanks again for being here. You are amazing. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
All right, friends, it's been another great fall infusion series for our joy today. We'll be back again next week, and we look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day, everyone. Reminding you to live, share, and lead with joy. The world does need your voice. Keep shining your bright light. Bye, everyone.